50 years after the ashes of the Persian Wars settled, an entirely new kind of civilization emerged in Greece. We find the record of how that society was built painted directly onto the clay of their pottery. In those early post-war decades, Athens was tightly controlled by an elite conservative council known as the Areopagus. The Areopagus was an aristocratic body of former magistrates who held absolute veto power over the city's laws and courts. Born into this exact ruling class was a young man named Pericles. His mother belonged to the Alcmeonidae, a wealthy, historically powerful noble family that had dominated Athenian politics for generations. While his birthright offered a path of traditional power, Pericles chose to study under rationalist philosophers like Anaxagoras. Rationalism is a school of thought that relies on reason and empirical observation, rather than religious myth, to explain the physical world. This education gave him a highly analytical, detached way of examining political problems. He also possessed a distinct physical quirk, an unusually elongated head. To avoid the mockery of rival politicians, he habitually wore a pushed-back Corinthian helmet in public, creating his iconic silhouette. His aristocratic family groomed him to inherit and protect their traditional oligarchy. Instead, he used his philosophical training to systematically dismantle it. He began by forming a strategic alliance with Ephialtes, a populist politician pushing for direct reforms in favor of the lower classes. In 462 BC, they executed a legislative coup, passing laws that stripped the Areopagus of its absolute veto power, draining their legal authority. That power transferred directly to the assembly, giving the common citizen direct voting control over courts, foreign policy, and laws. To protect this new system from conservative retaliation, Pericles utilized ostracism. This was a democratic mechanism where citizens could exile any politician for 10 years by scratching their name onto a broken pottery shard. Using this tool, he banished his chief rival, Cimon. By legally neutralizing his opponents and giving legislative control to the masses, Pericles centralized his own influence while engineering a direct democracy. With his domestic power secured, he initiated a period of explosive cultural growth, funded by repurposing the massive treasury of the Delian League. The Delian League was originally a mutual defense alliance of Greek city-states, formed to repel future Persian invasions. He poured those funds into a massive public works program. The crown jewel of this effort was the Parthenon, an enormous marble temple dedicated to Athena, built to physically demonstrate Athenian supremacy. He was equally aggressive in his patronage of the arts. He sponsored major theatrical productions, personally funding the performance of politically charged tragedies like Aeschylus the Persians. He cultivated an environment of free inquiry, welcoming the greatest thinkers of the ancient world to debate openly in the Athenian agora. Through this combination of architecture, the public theater, and state-sponsored philosophy, Athens transitioned from a regional military power into the educational and cultural capital of Greece. But that cultural explosion came at a cost. Athens treated Delian League allies as subjects, extracting tribute by force. This rapid imperial expansion bred deep paranoia in their primary rival, Sparta. When Sparta issued ultimatums demanding Athens grant autonomy to its allies, Pericles refused to compromise. He argued that yielding to any Spartan demand would dissolve the Athenian empire. His own hardline stance made conflict inevitable. In 431 BC, the Peloponnesian War began as Spartan infantry forces marched into Athenian territory, laying waste to the surrounding countryside. Instead of meeting the Spartan army in open battle, Pericles pulled the rural population behind the impregnable long walls. While Spartans besieged the land, the superior Athenian navy maintained an uninterrupted flow of supplies through the port of Piraeus. At the end of the first year of fighting, Pericles stood before the citizens to deliver a public eulogy, his famous funeral oration, to mourn the soldiers who had already fallen. Pericles centered the speech on his belief that Athenian democracy, equality, and freedom were uniquely exceptional values, framing them as a cause worth the ultimate sacrifice. The funeral oration served as a complete ideological defense. It justified the harsh realities of maintaining their empire and the devastating war required to sustain it. But his brilliant defensive strategy contained a fatal flaw. By trapping tens of thousands of rural refugees behind the city walls, he created a severe, unsanitary overcrowding problem. In 430 BC, a horrific epidemic known as the Plague of Athens swept through those cramped quarters. The disease decimated the trapped civilian and military populations alike. The epidemic struck Pericles personally, claiming the lives of his two legitimate sons, Pericles and Xanthippus. Observers noted the loss broke his usually stoic spirit. A year later, in 429 BC, Pericles himself succumbed to the plague. He left behind a fractured, grieving city, suddenly devoid of its primary architect. Without his calculated, restrained leadership to guide the military, Athenian strategy grew erratic. The city would eventually suffer total defeat, and Sparta would dismantle the empire piece by piece. He established the physical and democratic systems that would heavily influence Western civilization.